In a distant time, God dwelt in a formless world shrouded in darkness. He hovered over the imperial waters, and in a sublime moment God uttered the words, "May echo eternally make light." And so it was. Light appeared, and God saw that it was good. He separated the light from the darkness, revealing his divine power. However, a fundamental theological question remains. Where did God come from? When heaven and earth were no more than a promise, when darkness reigned over a formless void, God already existed and dwelt majestically alone in his divine greatness. He called light out of darkness, brought order out of chaos, and created a cosmos out of confusion. But the incessant question remains, where did God come from? Some claim that God created the earth 6,000 years ago in just 6 days. However, to be philosophically consistent and honest, the question is, where did God come from? Some claim that God created the earth 6,000 years ago in just 6 days. However, to be philosophically consistent and honest, the question is, where did God come from? Furthermore, if we understand the origin of God, how can we understand the influence of a spiritual force in a material universe? If we believe that God created the universe, logic leads us to ask, who created God? And so begins the endless cycle of questions. Who created God? The search for truth extends to infinity, challenging our minds and leading us to question the depths of the unknown. When we ask this question, we are immediately confronted with the idea of a created God, which is intriguing in itself. This illustrates a crucial point. Belief in God as creator is fundamental to our understanding. This question is intriguing because it leads us to consider a more plausible explanation: the impossibility of something arising from nothing. If we agree that it is not possible to create something from absolute emptiness, we come to the powerful conclusion that there must be something eternal always existing. Otherwise, we would be trapped in the eternal void, so we are all somehow forced to believe that something has always existed. This is the only logical explanation, because if we accept that nothing can come from nothing, then both you and I, who are arguing here, are something, and that something must have existed forever. The idea of something eternally ever present is the key to understanding the enigma of creation. Here's the rub. Everything we know about the physical world leads us to doubt. It leads us to question the possibility of something existing eternally, especially since the 1930s, when the Big Bang Theory was widely accepted. With this acceptance, our understanding of the universe changed dramatically. The theory suggests that our current universe is just a temporal manifestation, a single iteration in an infinite series. When we consider the evidence, we see that the universe is constantly changing. Energy is gradually being consumed, as taught by the well-established second law of thermodynamics, which states that energy runs out over time. Stars are losing their energy, and the expansion of the universe seems to be accelerating, pushing its limits beyond our comprehension. All this leads us to conclude that the physical world as we know it is not a viable candidate for something that has existed eternally. Now, the big question is, whatever existed eternally must be completely different from what we see today. It's the primordial cause. The primordial cause, the origin of everything, must be something that transcends our current understanding. We are challenged to explore the true nature of this mystery that goes beyond our physical world. I recognize that the idea of something that exists eternally may seem challenging, but I would like to present a different perspective. Considering that everything we perceive is contingent, i.e., things that could be otherwise are only fleeting manifestations, even apparently solid objects, like this chair in front of you, were once mere possibilities on the verge of non-being. They are not permanent and disappear over time. The truth is that all these things cannot explain themselves. They are interconnected like dominoes in a chain of interdependent contingencies. At some point, we have to assume that there is something fundamental, something completely different from what we are trying to explain. However, when it comes to God, the central affirmation of the Christian, Jewish, and Islamic traditions is that God is eternal. Therefore, the question of God's origin does not apply to him by definition. The only way to argue against this is to assume that everything belongs to the category of created, but that brings us back to square one. The ancient Greeks explored this question, which is why John's Gospel begins with the words, "In the beginning was the Word." This statement invites us to consider that all things have their origin in something eternal and transcendental, something that is beyond our comprehension, something that already existed before everything. The ancient Greeks were interested in the distinction between two fundamental categories: what is creative and what already exists. Ultimately, this question boils down to whether there is something or someone that never came into existence. Christians claim that this being is God, and this claim is crucial to their faith. The question of who created God may seem legitimate to some, but I argue that it is not. Now, for those who believe that the universe created everything, I want to ask a question. Who created the creator of the universe? This question often perplexes people, and I myself have put it to many scientists. I remember one time I was discussing it with about 1,000 scientists, and a physicist came up to me and said, "Everything you say about God is interesting, but you're a Christian, and, as a Christian, you believe in the Trinity, that Jesus was God and man. That's absurd. Can you explain that to me?" I replied in the affirmative. But first let me ask you a question. What is conscience? He reflected for a moment and admitted that he didn't know. Then I asked him what energy is. He replied that, as a physicist, he could measure it, but he didn't know what it was. I continued, "Well, my question isn't about that. My question is, do you believe in consciousness?" He said yes. "And do you believe in energy?" Again, he answered in the affirmative. Then I said that you believe in these two things, but you admitted that you don't know what they are. "So you're an intellectual. Don't worry about it," he replied. "Don't call me that." And I concluded that that was exactly what you were about to do to me 5 minutes ago. If you don't know what energy is, don't be surprised if energy, light, gravity, and consciousness are mysteries. Don't be surprised if all these mysteries are contained in God. The question of who actually created God is not as complex as it might seem when we refer to God as an eternal and timeless being. The answer becomes clear as Keith Ward argues in his book, God, Chance, and Necessity. If someone were to ask what God is, the answer would be simple. Nothing could have brought about a reality that completely transcends space and time and is self-existent. To understand this idea is to understand that God is beyond the categories of beginning and end. Everything that begins to exist needs a cause. It can't come out of nothing. Something that is eternal and timeless doesn't fit into this initial premise. It doesn't need a cause. Even atheists, such as Daniel Dennett, recognize that if eternal truths exist, such as numbers or mathematical objects, they don't need a cause because they never came into existence. The concept of God is precisely the concept of an eternal, self-existent being, a primordial necessity. So the answer is simple. God has no cause because he is self-existent. Our definition of God is the uncreated creator of the universe who transcends all limitations of time and space. The question of who created the uncreated creator is like asking about the sound of silence or what emptiness does. What I'm trying to illustrate is that there is a definition of silence that prevents us from asking such a question, just as when we question who created the uncreated creator of the universe, we are following a line of reasoning that doesn't apply to him, which brings us to an important point. Christians base their beliefs on an uncreated God, while atheists often give different answers. As a former atheist, I also believed in an uncreated creator, although my understanding was different. Perhaps I considered the idea of a generator of the multiverse or some quantum environment in which universes arise spontaneously. Whatever it was, the idea was that the universe was not created. So, ultimately, everyone believes in the existence of an uncreated creator. What I would like to ask is that you continue the story from the beginning of the universe to the impact of God's spiritual matter on matter. Given that we all have this belief in an uncreated creator, perhaps the essential question is how this creator relates to our space-time continuum and the matter known as the continuum. Here is the crux of the matter. All these elements, time, space, and matter, must have come into being at the same time. If there was space but no time, where would you put it? And if there was matter in space but no time, where would you put it? You can't separate time, space, and matter. They have to coexist. The Bible addresses this question concisely in just 10 words. In the beginning, God created the heavens, space, and the earth. So time and space were created together with matter. These three elements form an essential trinity. Time encompasses the past, present, and future. Space has length, width, and height. Matter exists in the states of gas, liquid, and solid. This trinity was created instantaneously, and the God who created them must be beyond them, transcending all temporal limitations. If God were subject to time, he wouldn't truly be God, as he would be limited by his own creation. The creator of this computer is not trapped inside the computer manipulating numbers on the screen. In the same way, the God who created this universe is not limited by it. He is beyond the universe and through it, unaffected by it. Now, when it comes to Dan's assertion that a spiritual force cannot have any effect on a material body, this raises some intriguing questions. How do we explain emotions like love, hate, envy, jealousy, and rationality if our brain is just a random collection of chemicals formed over billions of years? How can we trust our own reasoning processes and our perceptions of what is right? Asking where God came from presupposes that God is limited and limiting, which is not the case. The God I admire is not limited by time and space. Even if I tried to fit him into my three-dimensional mind, he would still be worthy of worship. That's what fascinates me. He is beyond comprehension. He reminds me of his words when he stepped on the devil's heels and told him to stay there. This means that God is not limited to place or form. His presence is omnipresent and transcends all boundaries. At a meeting in Detroit, a mathematician approached and said, "Reverend, let's be rational about this issue you're discussing tonight. To say that God came from nothing just doesn't make sense. Let's be reasonable." I replied, "Very well, let's be rational. The reason God came from nothing is that there was no place for him to come from, or to come to. He didn't come from nowhere. The reason he had to reach out when there was nothing to lean on was because there was nowhere for him to lean on. He hung this world on nothing and stayed on nothing. He picked up the hammer of his own will and picked up the anvil of his omnipotence. Sparks flew, and he caught them in his fingertips and launched them into space, adorning the heavens with stars. No one objected. There was no one to dispute it. Then God himself said, "This is good." God has given Christ a name above every name, so that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. I want to highlight some specific questions about the origin of God and the nature of creation. These are profound questions that have intrigued humanity throughout history. Regardless of individual beliefs, one thing is certain. Our ability to understand the truth about God and the universe is limited. The idea of an uncreated creator, a God beyond time, space, and matter, challenges our understanding but also reminds us of the greatness of the unknown. Ultimately, the search for truth is a personal and spiritual journey. Each of us can find meaning and purpose in our own way. We explore perspectives that invite reflection, expand thinking, and recognize divine transcendence. Regardless of where you are on your spiritual journey, I hope these discussions have inspired an appreciation for the complexity and beauty of the universe and the mystery that surrounds divinity. Thank you for participating, and may your journey be filled with meaningful and enriching discoveries. Want to know more about the limit of your consciousness? What if I told you that the light of the Scriptures is immortal? Watch this video to have your doubts cleared up.